Frenzel. We're going to talk about cyberpsychology. I am a PhD candidate. Of course, I've got a Master's in Information Systems Management, a Master's of Science, Cybersecurity Information Assurance, and I am the Director of the Cybersecurity Program here at Collin College. Okay, so first of all, we talk about cyberpsychology. Most people fail to recognize that we're already engaged in it. So some quick definitions. Psychology is study of self. It's really what it's about, right? How does your psyche come out? Cybersecurity is any and all active measures taken to protect people, process, or technologies we go across. The reason that's important is this. How many of you picked up your phone today and checked something? Matter of fact, some of you are still checking things. I'm just giving you a hard time there. So think about every time technology engages you. As you go through things, what are you doing to engage technology? Because it's a two-way process. That's really what cyberpsychology focuses on. Now, cyberpsychology, if you use a technology, basically we're going to talk about this again, it plays a part in everything you do. Anyone got one of those wonderful smart cars? I think they call them a Tesla. Okay, we start talking about things where cars drive themselves. Okay, for our discussion, cyberpsychology is the integration of psychological concepts with technology. We all deal with psychological concepts every time we go to the grocery store, we go to a restaurant. Colors are chosen so that it will engage us. Technology does the exact same thing. So it's not just about morality, cyber law, cyber ethics. I got a whole bunch of these here. Understanding technology, social media, and cybercrime. How many of you think of cyberpsychology and automatically go down the criminal aspect? Several hands. The reason why is because that's how we're really thought to think about it. But I'm going to ask you, how many of you go to a Facebook page? How many of you go to a LinkedIn page? There's absolutely nothing criminal about that. But we don't think of that when we hear the term cyberpsychology. Why not? Because we've been taught to think of cyberpsychology from the criminal aspect point. Okay, I don't need to know how to do your job, just how your technology affects you, and how to manage the component of the socio-technical system, the STS. The reason why is very simple. You, with your technology, make a work unit. Once you understand that, you begin to realize that people, process, and technology component is critical to success. If we try to separate them out and say technology is the only thing out there, guess what? Statistically, 98% of all your breaches are caused because we only address technology. Now, I can actually show you where that came from. That came from Coney Island Institute. It's awesome to think about that. Technology's great, but we're forgetting the most important factor, people, and how people engage. Okay, so a little bit about me. I started out as a linguist, not a technologist. I spent 10 years active army, interrogation, counterintelligence. Don't laugh. I got into technology because somebody said, who can type? That's true. We're standing in a platoon formation, the platoon sergeant walks out and says, okay, I know I've got some typists in here. I've got a platoon full of college graduates. I was the only non-college graduate at the time. Going for E4, we had to show that we could actually type unless you were a college graduate. You got that test waived. So I was the only one who had a college typing test in my 201 file. And because of that, I got suckered into technology. As you can say, cyberpsychology definitely shaped my career path. Okay, so many of you don't think about the skills that you have, but you need to. Those play a huge part in how this upcoming generation sees things. Okay, some basics in my classroom. First of all, I'm not designing a class to diagnose emotional problems. Not my skill set. I am a great listener. I am not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I do have several on staff, though. You think I'm kidding? This is not a traditional psychology class. We don't talk about Freud. Nothing to do with the guy. Okay, the class is designed to make you aware of yourself. First of all, as a technologist, how many of you have walked in and seen a technologist who could not talk to somebody else? I see some people not raising your hands, either you're lying or you had your eyes shut.
Yeah.
Okay, because let's be honest, we've all got them. We've all had those technologists walk up and go. There's a reason the standing joke was you keep the IT people in the closet, feed them pizza and Mountain Dew.
Or raw meat.
I didn't hear about the raw meat one, but I'll remember that. Okay, we also established rules of engagement in our class. First things first, you're not taking the opportunity to attack your neighbor. This is about learning to communicate. If you can't communicate in the workplace, don't worry about it. You won't have a job or a workplace for very long. Okay, it's an opportunity to learn in an uncensored, unmasked methodology. I want my students to learn, very simply, to engage those around them. That's what it's about. Technology, communication, great. But they first have to develop the people skills to go out there and actually engage. If they can't do that, don't worry about it. Again, they won't have a job for very long. So how do we integrate these two? Get someone to identify who they are. At the beginning of our class, they go through 5 separate personality tests. Our discussion questions focus around their personality, and we even drive in those things like, how does technology engage you? Quick question. If you're a technologist, here's the question for you. How many of you are annoyed by technology at times? Okay, got news for you. We're all technologists in here. We can deal with that. Imagine a 78-year-old grandma who's actually never dealt with something before. The power button comes on. She throws the keyboard. By the way, that happened to me. Okay, so the honest to God truth is this. We have to teach our technologists to engage people. Okay, get someone to identify what is a cyber asset to them. Because I say cybersecurity, cyber asset, does that mean the same thing to everybody? IEEE recognizes 5 different career fields, science fields, computer fields, as possible sources for cybersecurity. It also identifies a new one coming out, you're gonna love this, data science. It's investigating it for the very first time this year. And then it goes into this other thing, which is hilarious. It says other professions. What does other professions mean?
All of them.
Everything else. You got that right. That is actually what they say, is everything else. So we identify 5 technology fields and then everything else, all of those feed into cybersecurity. Okay, show them how to integrate cybersecurity and their personality. How many of you think about your personality when you're presenting technology? A couple of hands. How many think about technology when you see how your user is integrating it? Do you wonder, that one's unique? Because that happens, okay? Get someone to identify how technology affects them. Again, how many of you get annoyed? I've been in the field since 1989. There are still some things that annoy me. Something pops up, somebody changes something on my Outlook. I go, are you kidding me? Office 365, I used to teach that one. How many of you guys remember when it first came out? Oh. Teaching Office 365 was a nightmare. Because, does it still have things disappear on you?
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, it's like Microsoft would just supersede something. Yeah, the application, the sub-application went away.
General cloud courses.
General cloud
They
courses.
actually tell you things you're going to change with the course material.
Exactly. So here's the fun part. Pearson used to have this thing for Office 365, is this book about 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick. And you'd have all this wonderful stuff laid out in the syllabus, and you'd go there and go, that sub-application's gone now. Well, we're going to skip to the end of this chapter. Didn't have a choice. Okay? So, how do you think technology was affecting me? How do you think it affected my students? Part of that frustration is what we need to address. Addressing it so they can talk about it. Which, by the way, everyone know that when you talk about it, we get into that thing called emotional intelligence. If you can identify it, you can identify how to overcome it. Okay, develop empathy for how others feel about and are affected by technology. I'm not alone. When I'm dealing with my students, they're not alone. It's critical for them to know that. In cybersecurity, we are a team effort. We're not like an IT. If you stick a cyber person in a closet and attempt to feed them pizza and Mountain Dew, they go absolutely nuts. It's bad. 6 weeks later, you're looking for a new cyber person. Why? Because that one just walked. Most of the time, cybersecurity people are very, very extroverted. We like to deal with people. When we start talking about technologists, not so much. They tend to be more introverted. But understanding the whole attack surface, why adversarial thinking, systems thinking, those larger engagement pieces, that connectivity is something most cyber people see. Okay, how many of you remember the Johari windows? You three don't count. Okay, so 2 hands. First of all, there's something known to yourself, okay? If I know it and you know it, it's what we call an arena. It's fair game for everybody. If I know it but you don't know it, that's a facade. I don't present that to you. Now, if you know it, but I don't know it, that's your perception of me. That's important to understand. In cyber, perceptions are more often reality. As we go down this process, we have to recognize the fact that your reality about me is your reality. If I come across as a mean, overbearing ogre, guess what? You're going to treat me like a mean, overbearing ogre. If you come across like you need to be left in a corner and maybe fed a pepperoni pizza every now and then, I might try and cut back on the red meats and just throw you cheese every now, see what happens. But that's how you're going to get treated. And then we have the double blind. That which you do not know and I do not know because I've never been in that situation. You've never been able to perceive me in it. That's critical for us to think about. When we go into new technologies, how many of you have actually played with the new implementation of software in the past 6 months to a year? Yeah, we all have. Every time you open up Office 365, you got a new implementation of something, right? Now, when it annoys you, that's a whole new world. It's important for you to understand that. How many of you have worked help desk before? How many of you actually had to invest stock for Excedrin? Those end users calling you because a new piece came out, you're going, oh, this just is not a good thing. Happens all the time. Now, how can we change our paradigm to improve ourselves? First things first, be open. The more your team knows about you, the easier it is to engage them because they understand what your perspective is. They may not want to hear it. That happens. You may get put as an extrovert inside of an introverted team or an introvert inside of an extroverted team. That does happen. You may be in a situation where there's certain things you don't want to share. And believe me, we've all been across those, right? There are certain things we wish people wouldn't share. I have a tendency to overshare. I'm sorry. My apologies to my team. Then there's things that we're very, very guarded on. How many of you think about what you're guarded on? How many of you realize that every time you're guarded, your team recognizes it? They recognize when you're skirting an issue. They recognize when you give a very nondescript, non-committal answer. They recognize that. They recognize your body language. Those are all things that play a huge part in dealing with you. It's important for you to realize that. As you're looking through this stuff, make sure you're paying attention. Consider an outside person looking at you, that extra set of eyes. How important is it? If we don't recognize that set of eyes, we may not recognize something we're doing. And of course, blind to self, unknown to others, we want to minimize that by making others aware. Anyone know what blackmail is? What's blackmail?
When you have something over somebody else that, and they're not afraid to use it, basically.
Okay, so what if it's already out in arena?
You can't use it.
Can't use it. We're in security. People want to leverage things against us. They want to leverage things against our organizations. If we're open, how hard is it for them to leverage something? Try and leverage it. Okay, cool. Here, hold on. Here, this is my buddy Bill. But do you mind going in and telling both of us? Why? Because you really can't use it against me. Or if I look over at Bill and say, hey, Bill, you mind talking about this? It's hard to use that. Okay, we also talk about emotional intelligence. This is not a Johari window. Looks like one, but it's not. That famous 4-pane window is really, really, well, it's an awesome tool. So recognition, self-awareness. Remember that outside set of eyes looking at you? Okay. Regulation, self-management. How do you behave? I was once told by somebody I was not supposed to use profanity. You know what I discovered? That lasted 2 weeks in my classroom. Do you know why? No, seriously, do you know why? Because typically people who monitor themselves to prevent profanity are putting up a facade. There's actually a whole lot of psychology studies on that one. What turns up happening is my students brought profanity in. As they put it, this is the only safe space on campus. What does that translate to for me? If that's how they're speaking to be open, do I want to put a hinder on that? Do I need to engage them where they're at? Yeah. Now, do I like necessarily using all kinds of profanity? Normally not. It happens. Sorry. I spent 10 years active Army, and then 6.5 years as a locomotive engineer. So it gets ugly. So now we need to be aware of our social awareness. How are things going for us? Picking up on the mood in the room. Remember what I just said, engage my students where they're at? That's where that's at. What about relationship management? How many of you like hanging out with somebody who just shuts you down every time you say something? Any hands? Any takers on this one? Nope, okay. So we'll move on. By the way, this is actually from positivepsychology.com, Emotional Intelligence Frameworks. It's a great resource. Okay, you're gonna love this one. This is our game plan. We teach cyberpsychology in a 16-week term. First 2 weeks, I front load everything. My students take 5 personality tests. They take introversion, extroversion, IPIP, they take strength finders, they take a 16 personalities, which is basically a Myers-Briggs and some other ones. Why is that important? Remember what I said earlier? If you can't talk about who you are, can I talk with you about who you are? If I don't have a point of reference, can I really talk to you about it? I need to know where I stand. Now, during those first 2 weeks, yes, they cover discussion questions. Yes, they cover things like triggers. We all got them. Everyone's got something that just really annoys them. Why is that important? That goes back to me talking to you where you are. Remember that awareness? Let me take it to you. If I expect you to come to me, are you gonna come to me every time? Mm-mm. But if I can nonchalantly approach you in such a way that's non-confrontational, if I can build that trust relationship inside the office space to where they look and go, hey, by the way, Ervin, this is what's been happening. Okay, this is normal. Everything's normal. Suddenly something goes out of whack. What do you think they do? They walk up to me and ask me about it. Build that trust. That's one of the soft skills that most technologists miss. Why? Because we think our version is normal, right? We think that how we see it is the way it should be. How many of you fall into that paradigm? Yeah, I see a couple people kind of, I got news for you. Every one of you do. Every one of you thinks that the way you see the world is the correct way to see it. Nothing personal, it's an engineer habit. Okay? It happens. So now we go through emotional intelligence for 6 weeks. We really focus on the student interacting with others. Remember that Johari window? Every week they're doing a Johari window. They're not allowed to do a Johari window with the same 2 people 2 weeks in a row. Do you know why? Because I want to shake up their paradigm. My first 2 classes in this, I had 6 cultures in the first class and 7 in the second. 3 different branches of Muslim, or Islam, I guess, not sure how to actually address that one. Multiples of Christianity and Buddhist. Guess what? The second section also had an Orthodox Jew in there. I can say that, I'm Jewish. Now, why is that important? We found out how much we had in common, not how much we had in difference. So as we go through that process, we begin to recognize the fact that, hey, these people have almost 0 technology background, but yet they understand how to talk with one another. So their midterm paper, very simple. How do you see emotional intelligence and its impact on you? Next, then we go into cultural intelligence. You guys have all heard of that one, right? Are you aware of cultures as they affect you and how you affect and interact with other cultures? Key component. How many of you recognize cultures outside of your native culture in your workspace? There are some people who either don't recognize cultures or they work by themselves. Okay? That's something to think about. Anyone know what the #1 consumer of H-1B visas is? Cybersecurity. What's the likelihood you're going to work with somebody outside your culture? Huge, right? Keep that in mind. That's why we spend 8 weeks focusing on cultures. Because they need to be aware of, this is, okay, I've identified myself, I've identified my emotional strengths and weaknesses. More importantly, I identify how to work with other cultures. Because you're going to find them in the workplace. You're going to find somebody who's going to say something that's just going to strike you as odd. Are you going to cut bait and run? Or are you going to successfully engage that person to actually build a better working relationship? That's up to you. But if I give you the tools to do it, why not? All right, one of the last things we do, we focus on food. I know. Looking at me, you can tell that I focus on food. It's okay. I'm not afraid of that. But we actually have each person bring in 3 separate dishes capable of feeding 3 to 5 people from their culture. The reason why is very simple. When you're in there, which by the way, I combined those 2 sections together, so we had about 60 people. When you're in there, you're not allowed to take anything from your culture unless there's nothing left. But you have to have at least 3 cultural items on your plate from not your culture. And then you fill out another Johari window. I love Johari windows. They're a lot of fun. Now, what I forgot to mention was every time you fill out a Johari window, you have to brief the rest of the class. You have to stand up just like Toastmasters, something like that, and actually give the presentation. This is what you like, this is what you didn't like. What did you do? What did you not do? Why? Because that actually works for that. Another thing that we don't talk about here, which we actually did, was we actually had 2 interviews in the class where we had somebody go up to the front of the classroom from outside the classes and actually got interviewed by the class. The reason why is because we want to make sure that they don't see just themselves. We want them to see outside people. Okay, I guess I don't think you guys want me to go through this again. I've already explained it. So here's the written down part. This is part of the slideshow so that when you guys leave, you actually have this down. This is how we work through the cultural intelligence. I'm going to skip through those because I've already discussed it with you. Here's where we're actually talking about. You have belief systems for self, society, and culture, right? But we have communication systems which include technology. That's critical for us. How many of you recognize that the new generation, millennials and centennials, their communication is through their texting? They might be an extrovert, but never say more than 4 words at a time. But if you look at them, they're going. You're like, do you have tendinitis of the thumbs? How many of you had that, asked that yourself that question? It's like, that looks like that hurts. It's because they text so frequently, that is how they communicate. We have to recognize that. They may not talk as much in class to you as an instructor or to their peers, but they might be an extrovert. Anyone ever paid attention to some of your autistic kids? How many of you notice the autistic kids, you read their, yeah, exactly. You read what they write. They might be starting as a college freshman, but you're like, they've got a better technical grasp of writing than many PhDs. Interestingly enough, they might show up as an extrovert. It's awesome. You sit there and you get this email and you go, no, seriously, who wrote this? Kid sits down at his desk, and it's another email with the same level and style of writing. You're like, the writing portion's gonna be really easy for you. Now let's talk about how to improve your spoken communication. All right, some of the feedback I've received from psychiatrists, psychologists, and students. I've actually had psychiatrists and psychologists asking to take this content to workplace. Yeah, that one's terrifying. How many of you think, when you think of psychologist or psychiatrist, you think somebody who's good at speaking and talking and listening, communicating? Yeah, exactly. That threw me for a loop too. I was like, this guy goes, I would actually like to take this and use this content at work. And I said, why is that? He said, I've got about 45 or 50 psychiatrists who need this training. I actually had one student whose parent read the books at home. She then took the content to work where she works as a chief oncologist. Yeah, her comment was, my doctors need this. Because when you think about it, think about how actually, think about the space you're in when you discover you've got stage 3 or stage 4 cancer. You're extremely vulnerable. Anything anybody says to you is likely to set you off, either emotionally or anger, right? So dealing with that emotional intelligence and that cultural intelligence and that presentation piece suddenly became very, very appropriate in the workplace. Okay, let's see. Students are providing feedback as they're learning to build their own safe places. That was the comment about profanity in class. That was awareness where I had to judge the mood in my classrooms. Their thought process was, I wasn't being transparent with them. So we need to be aware of that. Several students have been placed based upon the skills they have obtained in the cyberpsych class. Yes, we have people who are actually getting jobs starting at $85,000, $90,000 a year based upon their communication skills. It's hard to argue that one. Are there any questions at this time?